there is something no one tells you when you begin to wake up, something you discover too late when you've already taken steps you can't undo. You believe that evolving was the path to fulfillment, that transforming yourself would bring you closer to others. You were wrong. The truth is much harsher. When you start to see beyond the veil, when your awareness expands while others remain asleep, you don't become a beacon of inspiration. You become a threat. And the worst part is that you don't see it coming, because they sold you the lie that spiritual growth would make you more loved, more understood, more connected. But the reality is the opposite. The more you awaken, the more alone you become. Not because you are superior, but because your frequency no longer matches the collective noise, and that terrifies those around you. Listen carefully. When you begin to release the need for approval, when you stop feeding the dramas that sustain superficial relationships, when your presence becomes calm in the midst of chaos, something shifts. People feel it. They sense that you are no longer part of the game, that you've stopped dancing to the rhythm of collective unconsciousness. And it bothers them deeply, not because they truly care about you, but because your calm reminds them of their inner turmoil. Your silence exposes their noise. Your peace reveals their inner war. You don't have to say anything. Your mere existence becomes a mirror, reflecting what they prefer not to see. Eckhart Tolle explains it with devastating clarity. The ego cannot survive in the presence of full consciousness, and when you appear without ego, the egos of others panic. Here's the problem no one mentions. It's not that you become arrogant or distant, it's that your energy changes. You stop resisting what is, you stop complaining about what you can't control, you stop participating in conversations that endlessly circle the same patterns of self-imposed suffering. And for those who live identified with their pain, that is unacceptable. Because if you can leave, if you can let go, then they could too, but they don't want to. They prefer the comfort of unconsciousness, the familiarity of their known suffering. And your presence forces them to confront that choice. That's why they attack you, not for what you do, but for what you no longer do. You no longer feed the drama. You no longer validate their complaints. You no longer get lost in the mental stories they repeat like sacred mantras. Think about this. How many times have you shared a moment of clarity, a deep understanding about the nature of human suffering, and seen the conversation quickly steer away? How many times have you tried to point out that the problem is not outside, but in the identification with thoughts, and they look at you as if you were speaking a foreign language? They don't understand you because they don't want to understand you. Understanding you would mean questioning the entire mental structure on which they've built their identity. And the human ego would rather die than admit it has been wrong its whole life. Tolle says it bluntly. Identification with the mind creates a false sense of self, and the ego's greatest fear is that this falseness will be exposed. When you stop identifying with your mind, when you live from a space of conscious presence, you become that living exposure. Now comes the part that truly hurts. The people who loved you the most, the ones who shared your path, begin to drift away, not dramatically, but gradually. Conversations become more superficial. Silences grow longer. They feel you no longer understand them, when in reality it's the opposite. You understand them too well. You see the patterns that imprison them, the narratives they repeat, the resistances that create their suffering. And you can't pretend you don't see it. You can't go back to getting lost in the illusions you once held. You've crossed a threshold and there is no return. Unconsciousness is no longer an available option. And that makes you a stranger among your own. Let me be brutally honest with you. When Tolle talks about awakening, when he describes the collapse of the mental structures that held your reality together, he is not romanticizing the process. He is describing a death, the death of the false self, yes, but also the death of the relationships built upon that false self. Because most human connections are not based on real love, they are based on mutual egoic needs. I need you to validate my story. You need me to uphold yours. We need each other to confirm that our version of reality is correct. But when one of the two stops playing, the contract breaks. And the one who stays in the game feels the betrayal, even if the traitor is their own unconsciousness. Here's what nobody prepares you to face. Outgrowing them does not mean becoming someone better than they are. It means waking up from the shared dream. And when you wake up, you discover you were dreaming alongside other dreamers, and now you're awake while they remain asleep. You cannot force them to wake up. You cannot explain to them what you see, because words come from the mind, and what you've discovered exists beyond the mind. It is in the space of pure consciousness that observes thoughts without identifying with them. It is in the stillness beneath the mental noise, and that stillness is incommunicable. It can only be experienced. So you find yourself in a painful paradox. You have the greatest gift a human being can receive, the freedom from identification with thought, but you cannot share it with anyone who is not ready to receive it. And here comes the real danger, not the danger of losing friends or family. That is only the symptom. The real danger is the temptation to go back, because the loneliness of awakening is real. It is tangible. It is devastating in its early stages. You look around and see a world full of people trapped in their minds, suffering unnecessarily, creating problems where none exist, resisting what is. And you can no longer do that. You've seen the truth, that suffering is optional, that the present moment is all that exists, that peace is available in every moment if you simply release resistance. But they don't see it, and their blindness hurts you, not because you feel superior, but because you recognize unnecessary suffering, like someone who has stepped out of a dark room and sees others bumping into walls, searching for an exit that's right in front of them. The temptation to go back is insidious. It appears disguised as compassion. It tells you that you must lower your frequency to help them, that you must return to speak their language in order to guide them. But that is an ego trap, because you cannot help anyone by putting yourself back to sleep. True compassion is maintaining your conscious presence even when surrounded by unconsciousness. True compassion is being stillness amidst chaos, without judging the chaos, without resisting it, without needing it to change. Tolle explains this precisely. Conscious presence is contagious, but only when you are not trying to spread it, when you simply are, when your peace does not depend on others finding theirs. But let's be realistic. It doesn't feel like a gift at first. It feels like exile. You look at family gatherings, where everyone argues about problems that don't exist outside their minds. You listen to friends complain about circumstances they could accept instead of resist. You watch people identify completely with their professions, their possessions, their political opinions, as if they were their essence. And you can no longer engage in that dance. Not because you feel enlightened, but because you've seen it is a dance in the void, a distraction from the present moment, a resistance to what is. And resistance, as Tolle repeats endlessly, is the source of all suffering. So what do? How do you navigate a world operating from the ego when you've begun to transcend it? Here's the answer you may not want to hear. You accept the loneliness. You don't fight it. You don't lament it. You accept it as part of the process. Because that loneliness is the doorway to something deeper than any superficial human connection. It is the doorway to connection with being, with consciousness itself. And that connection will not leave you. It cannot leave you, because you are that. It's not something you have, it's what you are beneath all layers of mental identification. Listen closely. The greatest mistake you can make in this process is trying to make others awaken. That is the ego disguised as spirituality. Because the ego always needs to be right, always needs to convert, always needs external validation. But true awakening needs none of that. True awakening is so complete in itself that it requires no witnesses. It can exist in total anonymity, in complete silence, without anyone recognizing or praising it. And that is the test by fire. If you need others to see your transformation, you're still operating from the ego. If you need them to acknowledge your growth, you're still identified with the mental image of yourself as someone special or evolved. Here is the final paradox that will destroy your mind if you try to understand it mentally. When you truly outgrow those around you in terms of consciousness, you stop seeing it as outgrowing, because full consciousness doesn't compare, it doesn't measure, it doesn't rank, it simply observes what is without judging it. It sees the suffering of others with compassion, but without the need to fix it. It sees collective unconsciousness without resisting it. It sees the ego in action without condemning it. Because condemnation implies separation, and true consciousness recognizes there is no separation, that everything is an expression of the same field of consciousness manifesting at different levels of awakening. But living from that space while interacting with a world that lives from the mind is like walking through a minefield. Every conversation is an opportunity for the ego to resurface. Every criticism is an invitation to identify with the defensive mind. Every attack is a test of your presence, and you will fail many times because awakening is not a permanent state you reach and maintain forever. It is a constant returning to the present moment, again and again. Thousands of times a day, noticing when you've been lost in thought, noticing when you've identified with the mind, noticing when you've resisted what is, and in that noticing, returning to presence. Tolle puts it in a way that cuts like a knife. You are not your thoughts. You are the consciousness that observes the thoughts. But identification with thought is so ancient, so deep, so rooted in human structure, that returning to this simple truth is the work of a lifetime. It is not something you achieve once and complete. It is something you practice moment by moment, especially when you're surrounded by people completely lost in their minds, because their unconsciousness activates your unconsciousness. Their ego provokes your ego. Their resistance awakens your resistance, unless you remain rooted in presence, unless you return to the now over and over again. And here's what you will discover if you continue down this path. Loneliness transforms. At first it feels like isolation, like punishment for having awakened, but over time it becomes solitude, wholeness, the ability to be with yourself without needing anything external to complete you. And that is true freedom, not the freedom to do whatever you want, the freedom to be who you are without depending on anyone's validation, without needing others to understand your path, without requiring them to share your vision, simply being, existing, present. But let me warn you of something crucial. This path has a cost, and the cost is everything you believed yourself to be, all the identities you constructed, all the relationships you maintained from the ego, all the certainties you defended. All of that must die so you can be born into full consciousness. And most people are not willing to pay that price. They prefer the comfort of familiar unconsciousness over the discomfort of the unknown awakening. And you cannot blame them. Because awakening is terrifying. It is the death of the self you believed you were. And even if that self is false, even if it is merely a mental construction, it feels real. And its death feels like your death. That is why so few awaken. Why the world continues to operate from the collective ego. Why the same wars repeat, the same patterns persist, the same suffering recycles generation after generation. Because awakening requires courage. The courage to be alone, the courage to be misunderstood, the courage to lose everything you know in order to gain something you cannot name. And most don't have that courage. They prefer the familiar prison over the unknown freedom. So what is the danger of surpassing everyone around you? The danger is not in surpassing them. The danger is in believing you have surpassed them, because that belief is ego. The danger is in feeling special for having awakened, because that specialness is mental identification. The danger is in needing others to recognize your transformation, because that need is a search for external validation. The real danger is that the ego will hijack your awakening and turn it into another identity, another mental story, another form of resistance to the present moment. The only way to navigate this danger is to surrender completely to what is, not trying to change anyone, not expecting others to awaken, not resisting the unconsciousness you see around you, simply being conscious presence in the midst of the collective dream, like a light that shines effortlessly without needing anyone to see it, because light doesn't need validation. Light simply is, and in being, it illuminates everything it touches, without trying, without forcing, without needing to. So walk alone if necessary. Remain silent if the world doesn't understand your language. Maintain your peace even when surrounded by chaos, because that peace is not yours. That peace is what you are when you release everything you thought you were, and no one can take it from you, no one can destroy it, because it is not something you possess. It is the essence of your true nature, and that nature is indestructible, eternal, complete in itself.